Hey, everybody, welcome to the Real Tommy Unleashed on this wonderful Thursday out of Coronado, California. And I'm real happy to have a special guest today, a retired captain, Milwaukee Fire Department, Greg Renz. He's also a best-selling author of Beneath the Flames, a motivational speaker, and you probably do a whole bunch of other stuff. I think it's really great to get you on here. We've talked for a while. People might not know, Greg and I actually grew up in the same town, Madison, Wisconsin.
Right.
Never knew one another. I think you went to East.
Correct.
And I was supposed to, but then my folks moved and I ended up going to Sun Prairie. But small world, I ended up on the Madison Fire Department and you ended up on the Milwaukee Fire Department.
Yeah, man. And here we are connecting all these years later.
I know it's crazy. I think you know my brother Danny, Danny Anderson. At least he talks about you. So
okay.
So maybe he knows of you.
Okay, and I probably know him as I'm getting older.
He's not as good looking as I am, but that's his issue.
There it is. Yeah. No, I'm sure I know Danny. It's over the years. It's like the names fade, but the faces stay. So I'm sure.
Yeah.
One of those things.
Yeah, that's the way it is. But Greg, I'm glad you're on the show today, and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
I'd like to know why you got into firefighting and why you decided to write your book and what you're doing.
Okay, so I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison for 4 years, and thought I'd like to be a doctor. So I applied to med school, and I didn't get in. And it turned out that some of the things that you think you really want turn out to be the blessings when you don't get them, because I knocked around at quite a few different jobs before finding the fire department. And, I graduated from UW-Madison and really didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. So I had some relatives in Milwaukee who suggested that, the Milwaukee Fire Department is hiring. Maybe you'd be interested in something like that. Now, I had never, ever considered being a firefighter. This was just, okay, sounds like a job. So I went down there and went through the testing, which I think there were 3,500 applicants. And I was told, your chances of getting on are slim. Thankfully, I got on. And when I started finding out more and more about the fire service, I fell in love. I mean, I found my passion. I can't say I loved every minute on the job, because there were plenty of times on the job where I'm like going, what the hell are you doing here?
Exactly.
but taken as a whole, I mean, it was phenomenal. So, I spent 28 years in Milwaukee, when I retired as a captain. And so, when I retired, it was like, what, I need to find something to do with my life. And I was an avid reader. I mean, I loved reading. And, I had all these stories from working, especially in the inner city. It's kind of a unique setting. Most people really don't know what the inner city of Milwaukee is like. All they know is what they read in the newspapers and see on television. And it's much more complex than that. And so I had all these stories, worked with really colorful characters. And Tom, that it's like the fire service attracts very colorful people.
Absolutely.
and some of these people, when I say colorful, I'm probably being really, really kind, because I don't know if some of us should be out in public, really. But by the same token, these are the same people you want crawling into a burning building to save your
We don't all look like Kurt Russell.
And isn't that the truth? Yeah. Oh gosh. So I had all that, and so I had story, character, unique setting, and I thought, maybe I'd like to write my own novel. How hard could it be? It's really hard.
It's very hard.
Yeah, you know yourself, right? So I was smart enough to start taking courses through UW-Madison. And in taking those courses, the first courses in creative writing, and the first courses I took, I realized I knew nothing about creative writing. Now, as a captain and writing fire reports and EMS reports, they're really not supposed to be creative, and they're not really supposed to be fictionalized. So quite a difference in creative writing and writing novels than writing reports. So first assignments I got back were all marked up and read. Yeah, Greg, you really need to work on your grammar, punctuation, syntax, your point of views all over the place. But keep writing. These stories are amazing. And so I had the right mentors at the right time. And I was so fortunate because it could have been very easy to get frustrated because writing is pretty damn frustrating. And they gave me enough encouragement where I realized how much work I had to do to learn the craft and to write a novel that would resonate without just totally destroying my confidence where I just said, I can't do this. So I was so fortunate. Went through a bunch of different mentors at UW. And so I worked with, them, and I went to conferences, workshops around the country. I studied with Robert Olin Butler down in Florida. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. And he gave me some of the best validation. Oh, man, I was down there. They had some agents, New York agents and editors down there. And they were telling me how much I needed to really change the story up for them to be able to sell it commercially. And what they were telling me was like, I don't know if by that time I had worked on a novel for close to 10 years that had gone through 4 professional editors and, I paid a lot of money for these folks. And at this point, my mentors were saying, it's ready for prime time. You got to get it out there. So talking with Robert Olin Butler, he said, I know what some of those agents are telling you over there to do with your story. He said, I don't want you to do that. He said, I can tell you're writing from way inside in here. He calls it the white hot center, and he can see the emotion on the page. And he said, don't let them shake you off of that. And so later on, when I got offers of representation from a couple of New York agents, they wanted me to really gut the story, make it more commercial. I mean, it's still a commercial thriller, suspense type novel. But the stuff they wanted me to cut was really the stuff that made the story so emotional. The story that focused around like the family relationships on young Mitch is the protagonist. He's a young farmer and volunteer firefighter, and a horrible thing happens and he ends up in the inner city of Milwaukee, kind of the hero's journey. And they wanted me to get rid of all the rural aspects of the story and just plop my protagonist, Mitch, right in the firehouse. And I thought, well, you really get rid of the hero's journey by doing that, and you don't really dive into Mitch's character deep enough by doing that. And so after talking with Robert Olin Butler and him encouraged me, I turned down a couple of big time agents that sold quite a few 6-figure deals, and some of my writer friends, are you crazy? But I couldn't do it. I simply couldn't write the book they wanted me to write. I do have another book maybe that they might like, but that's another story. So, right. so the book came out and did really well. And the interesting thing is, with all the talks I did, around the Midwest, and the people who had read the book, the very things that they loved the most were the things that the agents wanted me to get rid of. And I thought, oh man. So, and the book went on to win a bunch of awards, which was kind of nice. It won a couple of international book awards, the Midwest Book Award and the Debut Novel of the Year Award. And those were all nice. But what really validated writing this story the way it had to be written were the first responders contacted me. Because
exactly
the story really, it deals with PTSD, and it's not the main theme of the story, but you get up close and personal with how our job affects people. So I had people, first responders, coming up and just thank me, saying, thank you for writing a story that shows people what our job is really like. Not the excitement of jumping on a fire truck and racing to an alarm and putting out fires, but the trauma we see on a daily basis, that, some of the just horrific things that we're involved in and how it affects us on an emotional level. And one of the things I like to point out is that most people, when they dial 911, and this is the worst day in their life. And absolutely, for us working in the inner city, some days we might respond to 4, 5, 6 of these, major calls where people are losing relatives, heart attacks, their house burning down, major car accidents. And that's on top of another 20 just runs that aren't that critical. So it's a busy area. And when you're dealing with those events, especially as an officer, you're making those split-second decisions with very little amounts of information. And it's very chaotic. The emotions are way up here. And now you have to process all of that. And if you make a wrong decision because you didn't have much information, you have to deal with that. So I couldn't tell you how many firefighters and first responders have started sharing their stories after reading my book, saying, yeah, your book really opened my eyes that how necessary it is for us to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
Many of them were saying that, this was 20 years ago. I've never talked about it. If we talk about it at all back in the days when we were on, you used a lot of dark humor, and
absolutely.
And some of that the public would not want to hear some of that because it's pretty raw. And so
unless you've been there, you just can't realize and how therapeutic it actually is for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have to vent somehow. And
yes.
So, I mean, one fella said, you know what, we were chatting and over a few beers, and he said, I haven't slept through the night in 20 years. He says, I wake up every night in a cold sweat with my heart pounding. And he talked about the incident that he was involved in. Just can't get it out of his head.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just run after run. I mean, one firefighter was talking about an incident where there were 13 casualties, and they're going into and pulling these bodies out of this house one after another, children, mothers, fathers, and they're lining them up on the lawn. He said, I can't get that vision out of my head. He said, I see them laying on the lawn and people trying to tend to them, but they were all gone. Mm-hmm. He said, it's just, it weighs on him. And what's kind of nice was that many of these people realized it was time to talk about it and possibly get some help. And I know I had one firefighter come up after a talk, and everybody was gone, and I could see the pain in his eyes. And he said, that stuff you were talking about, that PTSD, he says, I'm dealing with that. And I don't know what to do about it, because if I go for help, my crew's not going to trust me anymore. And I said, well, I'm not a therapist, but, tell me about it. So he shared his story, and he had some dark stories to tell. And he talked for 45 minutes. I just listened and kind of nodded and validated what he was saying. And when he got done, I said, yeah, that's some tough stuff. And I shared a story of a friend of mine in Milwaukee who came real close to suicide. And he had a 9mm gun in his dresser drawer. Every morning he'd walk by and go, it's today of the day. 3 times he put the gun to his head. He doesn't know why he didn't pull the trigger. But a friend of his, a good friend of mine also, forced him to go get help out in Washington, D.C., a place that treats first responders.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared that with this firefighter and said, now this guy is giving talks on all over, talking about how he came back from that close to suicide and how he's making a difference in people's lives. And this guy told me, he said, I kind of knew that I needed help, but I needed somebody like you to tell me that I did. And he says, I will, I'll do that. And I told him also, I said, by you going for help, that might just open up the gates for some of your fellow firefighters to also open up about things that are bothering them. I mean,
absolutely.
Back in the day, we were just all about macho. No crying. What the hell's wrong with you crying on the job? One of the talks I gave up in northern Wisconsin, it was like a picnic setting, and I gave my talks and stuff. And I saw this guy that I worked with many, many years ago, and he was an old hard ass and smoke eater. Oh man, tough as nails. And he's the kind of guy that would tell you, hey, I don't want to see any tears around here. You're gonna cry, go cry by yourself. And so he was just a tough guy. And when I got done with my talk, I saw him marching across the lawn. And I'm thinking, because this guy was a brawler too. He got in fights in the firehouse. He was really tough. So he's marching across the lawn, and I'm thinking, oh, what's he gonna do? And he comes up to me and he sticks his finger in my chest and he goes, I hate you. You made me cry. It's like, yes. And then he went on to share some of his stories that he had dealt with. And, you start talking about this stuff and you realize that, hey, you're not alone with these things. So I think for me, that was really the greatest validation. Awards are nice, but when it actually changes people's lives and opens people's eyes to things like that, I'll tell you what, that's why we write. I mean, the bottom line is that's it.
I can relate to that, so much. And I think one thing we overlook it that maybe some of our best support is if we would open up to our crew, because we're closer than family.
Right.
And when we did have those discussions, it was surprising how many people had the same thoughts.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I can remember that, we had they had to start going through this critical incident stress debriefings and stuff. Right. And I can remember one we had at 1 a.m. They called all our crews that were on this one call to go in and have this at the training center. And the reason why they called us all in right then wasn't because they were worried about our immediate impact. It was they didn't want us to go in overtime.
Oh, cheapers.
the next day. And I kind of was looking disgusted. And one of the counselors said, what problem are you having? I said, the problem I'm having is probably what everyone has. We want to go back to bed.
Yes. Yeah.
and it was like, I'm sorry to be disruptive, but that's pretty much what we're all thinking about right now.
Oh, sure.
And I did end up going to, I talked to workers' comp, who was great actually, when the city ran it before they contracted out. Mm-hmm. And I went through we had an employee assistance program. Right. And I was really hesitant because the word was always, you go through that program and it's going to be in your file and they will know it forever, which I found out that yes and no. But they got me into a group counseling session. So I thought, okay, great. I'm going to go to this. There's going to be other firefighters and cops there, and we can sit and we can talk about this stuff. I get there and I'm sitting there with these like 4 or 5 civilians in this dark room. And I'm looking around going, okay. And I hear one's got mommy issues. The one his wife henpecks them. And they're going on this. And they said, well, what is your issue? I mean, what are you dealing with? And I said, I'm having a real hard time dealing with the 4 teenagers getting decapitated in a car accident. And this one woman in there goes like, how can you bring that up here? Oh. And the doctor that was holding this said, if you're going to be disruptive, you're going to have to find a different, counseling group. Whoa. It was like, so then I thought, okay, I see. And I just kept my mouth shut through the whole thing. And I didn't really say anything through the whole thing because I saw where it was going. I honestly thought we were going to have a peer program. And then at that time, I realized we didn't have a peer program. None whatsoever.
And that's something, Milwaukee's moved into. They realized the importance of the peer counselors. And my friend who I talked about, who came close to suicide, that's what saved him was peer counseling because we understand each other. And a civilian or even a therapist who doesn't have a background in this is not going to, I don't think is going to be of much help because you're not going to feel like opening up to somebody that doesn't understand the depth of what we deal with. And
no, we're really guarded, yes. and we build a wall up around ourselves and we only feel safe with people we work with.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's, of all things I miss from the job, I miss the brotherhood.
Absolutely.
The men and the women that we worked with were like some of my closest friends. And that's how we all seem to get through, was helping each other.
Sure.
But it's funny that when you talked about writing your book and what you were going through, which is, oh my God, so true. With anybody that writes you, they want you to be in this boilerplate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I wrote a spec script for a TV it was a firefighting one for half an hour. And it was, I based it off of Madison. You're right where
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And I created the characters out of the characters that I knew.
Right.
Which some were very colorful.
Yes.
But the opening one I did, it showed it was a total boring day. And a new rookie had come in from the academy and, we signed him all the rookie duties and he's got to do, he does watch in the watch room and, the engineer really is responsible for him. The lieutenant tells you to, take care of
Sure.
make sure he learns all the equipment. He knows
Mm-hmm.
what he's supposed to do and all that. And, I wrote in there that, the engineer comes into the washroom to check on him, sees his feet up on the desk watching TV, and jumps on him about it.
Sure.
Says, you haven't earned the right yet to watch TV. And let alone put your feet up on the,
Yeah.
that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And the whole thing was, and then I had banter between the lieutenant and the engineer, about, well, we haven't turned a wheel all day. We're getting a snowstorm. We're going to have to get the chains on, do all that kind of stuff, mundane stuff. But then you get the big one that hits at 2 a.m, and that's when all the action has. And then they came on and said, this is too boring.
Oh gosh.
And I said, this is how some days go.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden the shit hits the fan, and we actually had fire injuries and things like that from this multi-alarm fire.
Sure.
And I said I was showing the actual day.
Right.
You don't go from one emergency to another.
No.
Another emergency. I mean, it was funny. I was at this event, and there's a bunch of LAPD people, cops there, and they knew I was a retired firefighter, and they were asking me about Chicago fire, obviously.
Right.
And they said, how real is Chicago fire? And I said, well, there's a fire station, there's fire trucks. And I said, how real are half the cop shows you watch? And they just all laughed.
Right.
I said, there's more sex and relationships going on in that show in a fire station than I've probably had in my entire life. And we all know if any of that stuff went on in one of our firehouses, that person would be out on their rear end in 2 seconds.
Right. Yeah, it's when you talk about the authenticity of that, and that's in my novel. I'm hearing over and over, especially from retired guys. Whoa, you put me right back in those fires. You put me right back in that inner city firehouse. And that's kind of one of those rewarding things. You go, okay, I wrote that well enough where it pulled you back in. But it was interesting. I got an email from a reader who had been to one of my talks and said, oh, I just loved your talk, but I was so disappointed in your book. It's like, oh, she said, the way those firefighters acted and the way they talked, to me, it was just disgusting. And so she went on, and so I wrote her back, and I said, well, I can assure you. Oh yeah, she added. She said, my son is a captain on the Boston Fire Department, and I asked him about that. If his people act like that, talk like that, and he assured me that they do not act like that or talk like that. And so one thing I knew for sure was that her son was a liar.
But I was going to say the guys on Boston Fire I know. No.
So, but it was kind of funny. I mean, that was the one negative I got.
That's funny.
Yeah, it is funny. And I told her, I said that I'm sorry you were offended, but I can assure you this is very authentic. This is right out of the firehouse. This takes you behind the doors of an inner city firehouse, and you're going to see pranks that are just going to blow your mind, because back in those days, I mean, the hazing and the pranks and stuff that got pulled, many of them were very ingenious. I mean, today you'd be fired for many of those things.
We came up. I know we came up with some awful, amazing things. And my buddy, Lieutenant Mike, you're listening. I'm sorry I locked you out of the fire station naked.
Oh, no. Oh, boy. Well, one of the scenes, an incident on a Milwaukee Fire Department, it was so good, I had to put it in the book. And what it was you know how competitive we are at fires, knocking each other off the hose. We want to be the first one in. And so this one company kind of stole the fire from another inner city company. So the company that had their fire stolen from them sent over a box of donuts the next day with a note inside saying, this is from your neighbors, and we're thanking you for saving our house. It wasn't, but it was, the other fire house was sending this over to the ones that stole them. And so later that afternoon, the battalion chief brought the mail, and in the mail was an 8x10 photo of the guys from the firehouse who sent the donuts over, bent over with donuts sticking out of their butts, saying, "Hope you enjoy." And nobody, I wasn't there, and I always asked, I said, "Did you really send the donuts over that you had in your butt cheeks, or did you send, good donuts and made them think?" And they said, "That'll never be told." So,
yeah.
it gets down and dirty. There's no question about it.
And that one of the things that they had asked about the script that I did, they said,
Mhm.
"Well, your rookie is a black guy, right?" And I said, "Yeah, he is. How come you have him serving coffee to everybody all the time?"
Because he's
And
a
I
cub.
said, "Because that's the rookie's job."
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And in there, I had one of the first things I had when the engineer was taking around showing the station. And one of your main jobs until the next rookie comes in here is make sure nobody has an empty cup of coffee.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. Oh gosh, yeah, that's huge. Man, I should probably share one of my stories that just
Yeah,
stands
please
out
do.
from my career. And this takes place back in 2004. I was the captain on Engine 24 in Northside Milwaukee company, and very busy company. We averaged about 20 runs a day, so we definitely had a pretty good workload. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, we got a call for a fire on, I think, North 67th Street. And we're out of the firehouse in under 30 seconds, geared up and flying over the streets as we do. And it's sleeting out, so we're slipping and sliding a little bit. And it's a call for fire, but we don't get that excited because we get so many fire runs in that area that you just don't get cranked up until you know it's something. A lot of false alarms, minor fires. So half the way there, dispatch comes on the rig radio and says, "Engine 24, be advised, we have a report of smoke, heavy smoke in the area." Well, now we know we got a good worker. 10 seconds later, it comes back on. "Engine 24, be advised, we also have a report of 2 children trapped in a burning basement at that location." And now our battalion chief, who runs out of quarters, he's at another fire. So I'm going to be the first rig on scene, which means I got to make those split-second decisions and how we're going to go about rescuing those 2 children and also fighting the fire. Got to do both simultaneously, and you know how that all works. So thankfully, I had a couple of veteran firefighters and a veteran driver. So in situations like this, it's great because you don't have to give orders. They know exactly what they got to do. So
exactly.
My driver starts speeding up, and we're slipping and sliding. The sleet is pelting off the windshield, and I'm just going, "Don't crash, don't crash, don't crash." We got kids trapped. If we crash, chances are those kids aren't going to make it. So we turn onto North 67th Street, and the entire street is loaded with smoke. It's atmospheric conversion with that moisture in the air. The smoke is hanging over the street. Can't see all the addresses are on the houses, which are set back. Can't see the addresses. So we can't tell which house is on fire. Well, the clock's ticking. We got to get there. So my driver's pushing it, but doesn't want to go too fast. We go by the house and have to circle back there again. Kids ain't going to make it. So, and we're trying to look through the smoke and struggling to try to see if we can see something. And about halfway down the block, my driver says, "Boss, it's got to be right around here somewhere. According to the address, it's got to be about mid-block here." Just as he said that, this lady comes running out of the smoke. She's got a white nightgown on that's smudged.
Oh, okay.
Comes running up to the rig, and I jumped out. She just about yanks my arm. Says, "2 boys trapped in the basement. Please don't let them die down there. Please don't let them die." So having 2 veteran firefighters, I didn't have to give an order. They knew they're going to grab hose, and I'm going to go to the back of the house and assess it and decide how we're going to go about rescuing those boys and putting out the fire. So we get to the back of the house, and boy, I'll tell you what, my stomach clenched because that thick black gray smoke just gushing out of that basement. I've seen a lot of fires, and I didn't think there was any chance those boys could be alive down there. And just as I'm thinking that, the lady says, "Those boys were calling for help right before you got here. Please, sir, please don't let them die. They all I got." Well, when she said that, I realized that if they had a chance, if they were just calling for help, they might have a chance down there.
Right.
And our protocols, we're not supposed to enter burning buildings alone, should have a charged hose line in case it flashes over and all that stuff. But you know what? The boys couldn't wait for the hose line. So I dove down the stairs. Basement fires, nobody likes those because there's no ventilation and all that heat and smoke comes up the stairwell. It's like a chimney. You got to crawl down through that. So I get to the bottom of the stairs, and I have a mask on, of course. So I'm breathing fresh air, but it's pitch black, can't see a thing. So I'm sweeping around the bottom of the stairs, figuring, well, if those boys were just calling for help, they should be real close to the stairway. So I'm sweeping around, nothing. So I called out their names. She had told me their names were Brenton and Brandon. So I called out their names, and I just stopped to listen for just the slightest sound of anything, the slightest sound of life. And there was nothing, just a crackle of fire way off to the right.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't going to leave the basement. Plus, I knew my firefighters would be getting down there with the hose line. So I'm going to start that search and rescue that we train on all the time. And I'm going to go straight to the back wall on all fours, touch the back wall with my left hand, and sweep the floor with my right hand, and just work my way through the basement doing that. And it takes a while. I mean, it doesn't, you don't find people immediately. So anyway, before I got to the back wall, I got to the bed. A bed in the basement, which is actually good because, the kids will hide under the beds and under the sheets. So I start rifling through the sheets and stuff, and they're not here now. You flip the mattress over, check under the bed. I was like, damn it. I think I used a lot more profanity than damn it, but got to the foot of the bed. There was like a pile of felt like clothing and bedding. Started rifling through that pile and came to what felt like a large rag doll. Picked up the rag doll and put it to my face piece, and I was staring into the serene face of a young, limpless boy. And I was sure he was gone. I mean, there was just no life in him. And at this point, I could hear my crew coming down the stairs, so I followed their voices, handed them off, went back to the foot of the bed, rifled through that, and found a much, much smaller rag doll. Same thing, limp, lifeless. It's got him out. Now that the other companies are coming down. We got another engine company, truck company, got all kinds of people coming down there. We've got a fire to fight. Got to go through a full search and rescue because we don't know if it's just the two boys down there. Could be others. We don't always get good information. Mm-hmm. So we're doing that, fighting a fire, and I'm kind of switching gears. I'm not thinking about the boys because I'm in charge of the operation down there. And about 45 minutes later, the smoke clears, and we pulled all the ceilings and walls apart, overhauled, made sure there's no hidden fire anyway. And now I'm starting to think about the two little boys that we pulled out. And as we're going up the stairs, I'm thinking, I know what I'm going to see. I'm going to see two little bundles covered by bright yellow plastic sheets. Emmy's going to be there and taking information. The police are going to be talking to neighbors, and the family members are just going to be wailing. It's just heart-wrenching. And I'm thinking to myself, my children are at home, safe in their own beds. It's just not fair for these kids to lose their lives like this. So we step into the backyard, and we're going to go to the side yard where I figure they put the boys. And I'm kind of in shock because it's like there's nothing there. It's like, where did they take the boys? Paramedic units are gone. And I'm trying to figure things out, try to process this. And Chief Tom Jones comes running across the lawn and says, Engine 4, amazing job. Both those boys are resuscitated on scene. They're both awake and breathing on their own on the way to the hospital.
Wow.
Who would have thought? Miraculous. So we high-fived, and we're excited about this miraculous rescue. It's like, who would have thought how close they had to be to death. And we got back to the firehouse, and of course the media came in, and they're interviewing everybody, and everybody's sharing their stories. And when things settled down, I went back to my office to write the fire report. And that's where a wave of emotions just swept over me. And I started sobbing. Or again, it's like, it's okay to sob. Nothing wrong with crying. So I started sobbing because I realized, I was part of something far, far bigger, greater than a firefighter finding two boys in a burning basement. Because
Absolutely.
I knew I was going straight to that back wall. No doubt in my mind. Trained on it extensively. I fought, I couldn't even tell you how many fires. But the boys in the bed were way over in that far corner. I never missed a step going to that bed. Then I looked at the printouts. We get these printouts that say when we arrived on scene, when the boys come out of the house and everything. Those boys were out of that burning basement in a little over a minute from our arrival on scene. That's almost impossible. I mean, it's just, it's like, how could that happen? So
time stands still when we're doing things like that.
Yes.
And it's something I think a lot of us credit it to a higher power. We get a feeling to turn right instead of left.
Yes. Boy, you hear that story
a lot
over
of things
and over
like
again.
that. It's like, why did you do that? And I don't know. Something just told me to.
And I know people who saved their own lives in horrible fires.
Exactly.
Where if they would have turned one direction, they'd be dead. They would not have made it out. And to this day, they still, I don't know, but it's something you have. But I should give you the denouement to this story.
Okay.
So, it's like with that amount of smoke and carbon monoxide, the chances of them having brain damage and have cognitive issues was pretty great. So I worried about that over the next couple of weeks. And 2 days before Christmas, I was at the firehouse with the rest of the crew who were present that day. And, I thought about the boys and just hoped we didn't save them and put them in a nursing home. And so as we're chatting or giving each other the needle, I heard this ruckus coming from way down at the end of the hallway, and turned around, and there was two bright lights coming up the hallway, and there were television camera lights. And in front of those two white lights was the silhouette of two little boys running down the hallway.
Oh, that's cool.
The chief stopped him at the door and he said, "Boys, these are the men who saved your life in that fire that night." And I looked at him, I saw the vibrancy, and it's like, there was no brain damage. The way they're moving, the brightness in their eyes, it's like, yeah, they're just fine. And then he pointed at me and he said, "And this is the man who found you in the burning basement." So the older one, I think he was around 7, 8 years old, came up and real shy, kind of said, "Thank you for saving my life." And his little brother, about 4 years old, kind of nudges him with his elbow, steps up and looks up at me. I'm sitting on the wooden bench at the table and just gives me a nod like this. And I look down at him because I got a knot in my throat. I can't talk. And I'm looking down at him and I'm nodding at him. So we had a great time telling stories about the day. We had bought him Christmas presents since it was 2 days before Christmas.
Nice.
They lost their house. Well, the house wasn't totally burned. We did save the house. It was just a basement fire. And did all that stuff. And when they were getting ready to leave, the mom came up and told me, "You know what? That's the best Christmas present I'll ever get. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough. Thank you." And every time I tell a story, that's why I want to tell a story, because I get to hear those words in my head again.
Definitely.
And I think it was about a year and a half ago. So I've been telling this story at book talks and stuff because people seem to really enjoy it. And everybody always asks, "Whatever happened to those two boys?" It's like, I don't know. We don't usually follow up on our patients. But about a year and a half ago, I got a hold of the mom on Facebook, sent her a private message, said, "Yeah, I'm the firefighter who found your two boys in that burning basement. And I'm just wondering, after all these years, how they're doing." This was back in 2004. I said, "The oldest one's grown, living in Texas, doing wonderful. The younger boy is a senior at Homestead High School, which is north of Milwaukee, doing great, getting great." And it's like, then she sent me pictures of the two boys grown with her. And I've got pictures of when the two boys, when they came to visit us at the firehouse. And there's actually a YouTube video when they come to visit us, and a little bit of the fire
nice.
Under, if you just look up Greg Renz Engine 24, you can see a video and you actually see the boys and the mom and everything. So with all of that, the one thing I also got to point out was that this wasn't one firefighter making a rescue, and you know that very well. This was all the resources of the Milwaukee Fire Department together with a great dispatcher, veteran firefighters, paramedics who can work under the most extreme circumstances, being able to resuscitate those boys. And I should mention the battalion chief, who actually showed up on scene about the same time, or just a touch before I did. So he was also at the back of the house when all this was going on, but through the chaos, all I heard was the mom screaming that her boys were in the basement. So he, this chief took over command of the fire ground, which was great. And he could have ordered me not to go in that basement because, that's protocol. But he, it's like he didn't even question it. He just said, "Go." So anyway, that's my story. I love to share, and it's great to share it because it's fun for me to go through, relive that experience.
It's a great story.
Uh-oh, I think I'm losing.
Story and
okay, I think I'm losing. If you hear me, I'm losing something.
For some reason, we just kind of locked up there, but in that intro, right after my intro, I did the little montage of Milwaukee fire response. That was Engine 24.
That was 24. Yeah, that's my old rig.
And I was riding that day. I took that with Rescue 2.
Oh, no kidding. Oh my gosh. Wow.
I was at the station, and I got the call, and the battalion chief says, "If you want to go with them."
Oh man. Oh, that's very cool.
So I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to videotape this."
You bet. Oh man. that is so cool.
It is.
Yeah. Oh man.
It was like, wow, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
In
yes.
Madison, you would have had to do 25 pages of paperwork.
Oh, I suppose. Yeah, yeah.
But I remember back when we used to visit in Chicago or some of the New York, even,
Mhm.
they'd say, come on, hop on.
Sure,
We did
sure.
that all the time.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you said, back in the day, there's a lot of
Back.
stuff we used to do.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. When you look at, man, it's especially the inner city firehouses were known to be outlaws. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you know what? We've kind of got our own set of rules down here, and as a battalion chief, you had to understand that because these guys would put down their lives for, I mean, they
Hmm.
put it on the line, and so yeah, I kind of gave them a little latitude on some of the behavior because some of that behavior, if you look at it again, like look at it nowadays, holy cow! I mean, I do a little in my book, but I don't even go as far because the story takes place in 2001, right after 9/11.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
that's still somewhat recent. Whereas, go back to like 1979, 80 when I came on. It's like, then things, when I came on, the stuff they did to me, whoa, you wouldn't, you wouldn't dream of doing that to a cub today.
I think yeah, exactly. I think back it was the 80s, we could go and we rode sometimes with Chicago. We go up to
Mhm.
Minneapolis and we would ride up there and get, additional experience
Sure.
when were younger. And a lot of stuff that they did, I think the statute of limitations is probably up on,
Yeah.
but they did
Right.
stuff that I'm just thinking, holy cow! I know we could never get away with this
No,
stuff,
no.
but again, they worked some pretty bad areas,
Right.
and they lived by their own set of rules.
Yes. Very
And
true.
I can remember one time in Chicago where one of the guys on the rig took off and he says, "You're here, take my place. I got to go do
Oh.
something." And I remember we were in a truck and I ended up
Yeah.
helping ventilate a
Huh.
high rise. I'm sitting there going like, okay, I'm just.
Wow. Yeah.
It was a different time,
It was. Yeah.
and the thing is, some of that stuff. I mean, even if you told it, people wouldn't believe it.
And somebody asked me
And
why I didn't write a memoir, and I think that's why. It's because it's like you'd have to make it believable. And
right,
if I wrote a memoir with the stuff that happened, people go, no, there's no way. No, you got to be making that stuff up. Whereas if you put it in fiction, you still have to make it believable. And I think that's
yeah,
a challenge of fiction is making something believable where, it pulls somebody on the story and they're experiencing rather than reading the story. So yeah, it's
mhm,
definitely a challenge, but yeah. And for me, it's like right off the bat, when I started writing, I realized I loved making up stories
mhm,
and with the plot points and all the structure that
yeah,
goes into it and just the ups and downs, like, okay, what can I do to make life more miserable for my character than it is right now? What's the worst thing that can happen to him? Now can I make it even worse than that? And now, of course, you're going to get the reader kind of behind the character going, oh my God, how can he deal with it? How can he
yeah,
ever figure
yeah,
out his way out of that? So I really enjoyed that. Whereas in memoir, it's all there. And, it's like, the stories are there, obviously you got to write them, but in fiction, many times it's like, where's this story going to go? And
well,
where's this plot point going to take you now? And I just learned that creative side is where I found the thrill of writing, was just the creativity that comes to you just out of nowhere. And, scenes that come out of nowhere, dialogue that comes out of nowhere, where you go, God, I've been stressing over that for 2 days. That's what I was
mhm,
looking for. And I'm sure
yeah.
you know that yourself, with all
And
the things
sometimes
you've done.
you have to you step away and something might happen or you see something and go, oh my God, that's so simple. Why didn't I think of it?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think Stephen King talks about it in his book on writing, where
Hmm.
somebody had asked him, I said, so do you ever get stuck in your stories? I mean, you're such a great storyteller. Do you ever get stuck? And what do you do when you get stuck? And he says, you know what? Sometimes you just got to wait for the boys in the basement to send something up. And
Yeah.
I kind of live by that. It's like, if I'm totally stuck on something, I'll just give it a little time, and probably it's going to come to me right in the middle of the night. But
Exactly, and that's when a lot of stuff comes up. I think we just
yeah,
forget about everything else, and then all of a sudden that thing pops in.
yeah,
I was watching a seminar online, and they were talking about how writers, either book writers or screenwriters, are terrible procrastinators
oh,
because you get stuck in some place and
yeah,
you'll sit there for the longest time looking at it, not doing anything,
right,
and you have to walk away, and then when it hits you, you come back. I
right,
thought,
right.
wow, there is a lot of truth to that.
There is, yes.
and, and
Yeah, for me, that was one of the, like when my mentor told me after taking those courses at the UW, I was fortunate because she really got behind me, and we had the Writers Institute conference in Madison, which attracted like 450 writers from around the country.
yeah,
And she said, "You're at a point now where you need to start entering your work in these creative in the writing contest at the Writers Institute." And it's like, I'm a retired firefighter. Some of these are MFAs and people that have published already. What am I doing throwing my work in with theirs? So no, you need to do that. So I did. And this was probably about 3 years into the creative writing courses and taking workshops and stuff. And Lori Shearer, who was the director of the conference, was going through honorable mention, third place, second. And I thought, well, if I didn't get an honorable mention, I'm not in the running. She got to first place, looked over at me, and she said, out of 450, pointed at me and said, "Greg, first place in fiction." Well, what did I do? I immediately looked around because it had to be somebody, Greg, behind me here somewhere. Said, no, Greg, you won first place in fiction. And then she went on with poetry and memoir and stuff and got to nonfiction. And I had written a short piece on the story I just told you. And she went through it and got to first place. Greg, you won first place in nonfiction. Bam. That was the validation I needed to kick off my writing career and go,
exactly.
Yeah, you know what? You can do that, which I think we need that at some point where you go, I can do it, because it's probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever done in my life, because sometimes what goes on the page isn't anywhere near what's up here. And it's like, God, you call yourself a writer and you write that kind of crap. What the heck? But
we all go through that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've talked to a friend of mine that just sold a huge book, and she worked a year she had a 2-book deal. And I mean, she's got like, I don't think 18,000 reviews on Amazon. I don't know how many books she sold, and she got a 2-book deal, worked a year on the second book and had to put it away and said, it's just not working. And that's somebody that taught creative writing for 15 years, or has published, I don't know how many books. And I thought, okay, if you can get stuck on that, it's like, what am I feeling sorry for myself if I get stuck on a scene? My goodness. But it as you say, doesn't matter who it is. It happens to everybody. And I think the people I worked with over the years in the conferences and workshops, the ones who had the most confidence in their work probably shouldn't have. And the people that questioned themselves the most were some of the most gifted writers I worked with. And I must be okay, because I sure beat myself up.
I think it's a certain tenacity, and we get that from public safety or
Yes.
military or whatever, is that we don't give up.
Right.
And we always look for, like you're in a rescue, you always look for a different path if one doesn't work.
Yes.
And so you do that in writing too. And I see a lot of first-time writers who fall to the wayside because they can't get over that.
Right.
And whenever I talk to especially high school kids about writing, I just say, you have to have a thick skin.
Oh yeah.
And people, when they critique you, they're not doing it to be mean. They want
Right.
you to be the best you can be.
Right.
And sometimes it bothers you because you create these characters and they become real to you. And if somebody sees a flaw in it, all of a sudden it's how can you see a flaw in this person? But then when you sit back and you actually think about it and you look at it and you go, you're right.
Yes.
There was that. I don't know if I'll ever write a book again. I've got 2 down and I just co-authored a third.
Oh.
But I think I'm going to strictly, I think I want to just stick with screenwriting. I really love the process, and I love creating characters and those situations. But you run into the same thing. The one we're
Sure.
working on right now, we're on, I don't know, the 20th rewrite of the entire film. And each time you go through it, you see something that, no, it's not going to work. You got to fix it. And
Sure.
and we were just talking about this actually the other day, going like, at some point we just have to stop, because we'll be doing this forever, and then we'll get it to the point where we look at if we're going forward with production and that, we can always go back and make adjustments, which you do all the time.
Oh, okay.
And I've done that on scripts on set that I had written. Is something doesn't work, so you're there and you quickly rewrite, and you got to right off the top of your head, you got to rewrite some dialogue.
Man,
you got it's usually nothing intense.
Yeah.
But it's like somebody to come in and say, this doesn't work for me.
Sure.
And I don't feel it. So, okay, well, let me write. What do you feel? And then I'll rewrite something and give it to them.
Sure.
The process is very much the same. The format's a lot different.
Right.
But it's so exciting. I remember when I got into writing, I had written some small stuff for like Firehouse and fire engineering, nothing really in depth.
Sure.
But I got hurt in a fire, and I knew I wouldn't be going back to work after 23 some years. And they told me in rehab, one of the nurses said, why don't you become a writer? Look at your experiences. And that's where I thought, well, I could see being a writer, but nobody wants me to write about my experiences. It's the same thing. I said, I'm going to be preaching to the choir of those who are firefighters, and I'm going to alienate other people who are going to go like, no, that doesn't really happen.
Right.
And that's why I like getting into writing fiction. All of a sudden,
yes.
I can come up with my own scenarios, my own characters, and I can throw some firefighting into it.
Oh, yeah.
Into certain things, but you draw on your knowledge of that. And plus, I don't like writing about myself. I'll let somebody else do that. I don't need to self-bloviate.
Right.
I just very boring.
That's an interesting point, because it's one of those things. Like after that rescue I made, they like to give you awards, and maybe it was awards because I was getting old. I don't know, and they just wanted me to go. But so I had to give talks at these awards banquets, and we always say, "Hey, I was just doing my job," and we do mean that. I mean, we take a lot of pride in it, and that is our job, and we do that job. Well, the battalion chief said, "You need to tell that whole story, because this is too good of a story to say you were just doing your job. We need people to hear, because most of our, the vast majority of the runs probably don't turn out as well as that one did. And so when we have a great story to tell, I want you to tell it." And so the first time I told that story, it was in Milwaukee, and the press was there, and I think there were 200 people. And when I started telling this story, and I saw some of the folks with wiping their eyes, and it's like, oh man. And that was the first time I really thought, wow, if I could learn how to do that on the page and write, and as I said, I was an avid reader, man, what a great thing to be able to affect people emotionally like that. Hit them in a deep emotional way. And that's kind of why I didn't go with the agents in New York, because they wanted me to steer away from the emotional side, and also some of the racial aspects. There again, I had a black firefighter. I had you have a white firefighter from farmland working in the inner city of Milwaukee, in an area he's never been around and doesn't understand it. And I had some people going, "Yeah, you're pretty brave for a white guy to be talking about race." And I said, "But I'm not writing from the point of view of the black characters. I'm writing from the point of view of a young white naive firefighter in what he sees." And I said, right. I can defend that. I mean, it's like, I know that world. And working in the inner city, we were part of the neighborhood that, we worked in, got to know the kids around the area. So I knew the characters I wrote about from my perspective. But there were people that said, "Oh, be careful." And I had two battalion chiefs who grew up in the inner city, and I gave the manuscript to them before it got published. I did get a traditional deal on it and everything, but before I gave it to my publisher to actually put it out, I said, I want you guys to read this. And if there's anything in there that you think would make the inner city residents look bad or be offensive to the inner city community, I want to know about it, because that's not my intention. And so they both read it and came back and said, no, you nailed it. I grew up there, and it's like you nailed the neighborhood. You nailed the characters. No, and they both gave, and that was probably the most important feedback I got from anybody, because I did not want to cross that line and, go too deep into dialect that would make somebody not sound very smart or anything like that.
Right. One story I always relate to people is I was filling in driving one day in another station on the south side, and the captain is a black captain, great guy. Always, I wouldn't say we were the best of friends, but we were friends. And we were on a call. It was a nothing call. I think a smoke investigation turned out to be bird food or something like that. But we're in this
right
in this low income housing with people sitting on the floor, in the hallway. You're walking down there, and this one black guy sitting on the floor reaches up and grabs the bunker pants of the captain and says, "Hey, brother, how about helping a brother?" And he puts his arm around me and he says, "This is my only brother here."
Whoa.
And I'm sitting there going yeah, that's the truth.
That's true. Yep. That's absolutely.
And that's if we can convey that there's more of that than anything that goes on in the firehouse.
Absolutely. Well, I learned so much. I mean, I grew up in Madison, and back in those days, I didn't know any people of color at all. And so when I joined the Milwaukee Fire Department, I was stationed down at 7th Wells, where we had 22 firefighters stationed and a number of black guys. And I learned so much about what their lives were like growing up in the inner city by chatting across the table. And, there were arguments and people getting mad about this or that. But, man, I'll tell you what, you really got to understand where somebody came from because we didn't fear having these discussions. A lot of people kind of fear having discussions about race, kind of fear, like, I don't know what to say, is I'm afraid I'll be offensive or whatever. And it's like, no, we just let it rip and said, well, I heard this. And it's like, no, that's not true. What you're hearing is all BS, So, I mean, there again, Margaret J. Wheatley's quote, which really stayed with me over the years and I think relates to my book, is that you can't hate someone whose story you know.
Yeah, very true. And if we offended anybody, they would tell us right away.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
There's no beating around the bush there.
No.
Well, Greg, I can't believe it, but we've reached an hour in the show already. We're gonna have to close down because there's gonna be another show coming on.
Get two firefighters together. Yeah, very good.
Oh no, I could carry on this talk all day, but sure. If you could, give your website where people can buy your book.
Oh, sure.
See what you're doing.
Right.
Announce this here so that we can, our viewers will see this. Because besides this, once we close today, it's going to be on iHeartRadio, on Spotify, on Apple iPlay, and a bunch of streaming platforms. So
sure. Okay, sure. So my website is glrenz.com. And on there, you can order my book from there. If you want a signed copy, I'll send you off a signed copy. Or the book is available anywhere. I mean, you can get it at Barnes & Noble, you can get it at Amazon, any of those. But what I would suggest is if you're really interested in getting the book, make your way to one of the indie bookstores. They all can use help and they can order it. It's they all get it through Ingram, and so they can get the book.
Right.
It's there. So that's what I would suggest. And on my website, you can also go to the video of that rescue I talked about. And there's some shots of the fire later in the scene. There's also the boys and their family coming to the firehouse, which is really the coolest part of it. And you get to see the boys and hear them talk and the family members, and you get to meet the other firefighters who were at the scene. So it's pretty cool. It's on YouTube also, but if you go to my website, you can get the YouTube video there.
Wow. Well, very good, Greg. And if you come up with another book or you're coming up doing something, we can be glad to have you on the show again.
Oh, great, great. I am
And
working on the sequel. The sequel's about half done. So,
awesome.
yeah,
That's good to hear. And I want to thank our special guest today, retired Milwaukee fire captain Greg Renz, author of Beneath the Flames, his best-selling book. Like Greg said, go to an indie bookstore. That's who sells a lot of our books, and they need the help. The big box stores don't need it, in my humble opinion. But thanks for tuning in to Real Tommy Unleashed today at the Attorney King Studios in Coronado, California. And with that, Greg, you have a blessed day.
Okay.
Nice to have you on. And
this was great fun.
Once those links come out, I will send them to you so you could share it.
Okay, we'll do. Absolutely.
Share it with MFD.
Yep, I certainly will.
And I had Mikey Foostone on this, so I'm sure he'll be sharing it.
I love following him, man. He is great.
Oh, you should work with him.
You worked with? Oh my gosh, what a historian, though! My gosh, the stuff he posts. Wow.
He would always work. He worked on another shift at a different station, I think at 10.
Okay.
And so I'd fill in there once in a while, but he would always cook, and I cooked at 9.
Mm-hmm.
But he would put on the biggest spread in the world. And I don't know how he did it on what we chipped in, but amazing guy, amazing historian, and a big asset for the Madison Fire Department.
Right.
So, well, with that, Greg, it was a pleasure.
Oh man,
and
great fun.
Great fun. And you have a great day. And
okay,
this was a lot of fun today.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye now.